The current war against Iran is becoming more and more confusing the longer it goes on. Terms that I thought were clearly defined are given new meanings. Outlandish claims that are Outlandish claims are being reported daily by mainstream news and politicians without being challenged. And the very discussion about the war seems to have drifted into so many side issues that one wonders if anyone has a good handle on what is going on. So let me just point out a few of the things I find confusing so far. One, I don't understand what anti Semitism is. I thought the term Semite included a range of peoples across the Middle East and the Horn of Africa. When were the Jews allowed to sequester this term for themselves? They have literally pushed the Arabs out of the dictionary meaning in the same way that they've pushed the Palestinians out of their homes in what is now called Israel, West Bank, and Gaza. Even so, its meaning seems to be morphing into an even more narrow concept to mean disagreement with the policies of the government of Israel. Now, I always understood that when you are anti something, it means you are against that thing, which, by the way, is your inalienable right. However, now it seems the term is touted as hatred for the Jewish people as a whole and is being extrapolated from sometimes very benign statements expressing disagreement with the policies of the Israel government. It is even more confusing when I realize that there are a great number of Jews who disagree with the policies and actions of the Israeli government. So we have the very strange situation where Jews themselves are labeled as Jew haters, which should be an oxymoron to any reasonable person. Given the current definition of anti Semitism, I don't understand why anyone would have an objection to being called anti Semitic. If we should aim to be honest in our speech and to say what we mean, then why are we not standing up as proudly anti Semitic? That is, against the clearly immoral policies of the Israel government. Anti Semitism should logically be a rallying cry for all people who reject genocide, torture, invasion, and expansionism. Two, I don't understand why Donald Trump and the pro Israel lobby are allowed to continually fall back on the position that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon without being challenged about why they think this is a valid position to take. After all, both the USA and Israel have nuclear weapons themselves. In fact, the USA is still the only country that have ever used a nuclear weapon in war, and on civilians at that, while Israel has persistently denied that they were producing a nuclear weapon, and to this day has not admitted that they have nuclear weapons. It is the worst kept secret in history. They have resisted any and all attempts to have international inspectors of their program. Iran, on the other hand, has had the most stringent inspections of their nuclear program. They have signed an agreement that they had no intention of producing nuclear weapons, and the recently assassinated Ayatollah even issued a fatwa banning nuclear weapon production. It is the USA who tore up that 2015 agreement and now proclaims to the world that Iran has or is close to producing a nuclear weapon. This, contrary to all the reports from its own intelligence and security agencies. So I don't understand why seasoned reporters do not drill into this obvious hypocrisy and simply ask, what moral right does a country with nuclear weapons have to tell any other country that they must not have the same? Three, I don't understand why none of our journalists accept the rhetoric that a nuclear Iran would be an intolerable threat to its neighbors, that it would immediately wage war on Israel and the USA and its Gulf neighbors. History, both distant and recent, proves just the opposite. Since World War II, the USA has initiated or been complicit in at least 80 different civil unrests throughout the world and on every continent except Australia. Israel, on the other hand, has attacked or invaded its neighbors repeatedly. These include Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, not to mention the proven genocide and torture currently occurring in its prisons and in the occupied areas. Iran, on the other hand, has not initiated a single aggression and has refrained from committing atrocities even when attacked with the illegal chemical weapons by Iraq. Chemical weapons, I might add, supplied by the USA. So, why won't our journalists simply ask the logical question? What evidence do we have that nuclear Iran would be more of a threat to the region than a nuclear Israel, a nuclear USA, or any other nuclear power that exists? Donald Trump has a fallback response to anyone who criticizes his unprovoked attacks on Iran, including Pope Leo XIV. This response being that, well, you must want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Notwithstanding the weakness of the assumption that a nuclear Iran is necessarily bad, the obvious question is what is the logical link between not agreeing with starting an illegal war and that unproven assumption? I would think that it is the job of a reporter to follow the logical inconsistencies of the pat responses issued by politicians. I don't understand how the President of the USA could accuse the Pope of wanting a country to have a nuclear weapon. But what is more confusing is how this is allowed to slide past without challenge. 4. I don't understand how the conversation about this war against Iran became all about goals and achievability. Should it not be about its legality and whether it was at all necessary? After all, if this is not a legal or necessary war, can we ever justify any perceived benefit we might get from it? It brings into focus the axiom that the ends never justifies the means. We cannot accept that it is okay to break the law or engage in immoral acts on the pretense that we will benefit. That is a clearly criminal mindset. Podcasters and news reporters for and against Trump seem to be focused on what the deal holds for US, Israel, and Iran. In an ideal world, the aggressors, that is, US and Israel, would end their attack and threats, which have destabilized the entire world. They would pay restitution to Iran for the physical damage and the human lives lost since this illegal war, and they would admit that the war was illegal and unwarranted and apologize to the world and to Iran for the chaos they have caused. But in reality, all we can expect is that the war ends and that US and Israel have learned the lesson that the world at large would not support an illegal war or expansionism, or one based on the rhetoric of a preemptive strike without clear evidence and wide consensus. I don't understand why we are not standing up like the ex-US Marine Ken O'Keefe, as he did standing in the classroom of the primary school that was deliberately bombed in Iran on the 28th of February. The bombing that killed 120 children and 36 adults, where he stood up and challenged the viewers in the USA to ask themselves how they would feel if the shoe was on the other foot. If Iran had bombed a primary school in the USA, asked if we would not be chanting, Death to Iran at the top of our voices. Should people from every nation not be gathered on a flotilla to Israel, bringing aid and objection to the torture and genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza? Fifthly, I don't understand why, whenever someone is criticizing the US Israel's unlawful war, they feel somehow compelled to insert as an aside, well, it's not that I love Iran. I don't. Or it's not that I think Iran is not evil. It is almost as if they feel uncomfortable in simply criticizing the US Israel actions, lest they are accused of being pro Iran. They give no reason for not liking Iran or thinking Iran is evil, but seem to feel they must give this concession to validate their criticism. Number six, I don't understand why the assumption that Israel has a right to exist is not questioned. Is it really true? As I recall, the only serious solution to the so called Middle East problem, which was caused by the deliberate massive influx of European Jews to the area, was what is referred to as the two state solution. That is, the establishment of a state of Israel and a state of Palestine. The establishment of a state of Israel without a state of Palestine was never considered and was predictably always going to lead to instability of the Middle East, especially because of the stated goals of the Zionists, whose long-term goal is to dominate the entire Middle East. So does Israel have a right to exist without the corresponding establishment of a state of Palestine? Clearly, the answer is an emphatic no. But now we have the situation where the Zionist government of Israel openly states that it will do all that it can do to ensure that there is never a state of Palestine. It is mind boggling that the very people who came to the land as immigrants and were largely welcomed by the indigenous inhabitants have been allowed to expel the indigenous people, take their land, and keep those who refuse to leave what has been referred to as the largest concentration camp ever. They are allowed to openly demand and work actively against the indigenous people ever having a state of their own. I don't understand why so many countries who claim to uphold international law and human rights turn a blind eye to these atrocities. I don't understand why there is not a unified shout on the international scene that Israel does not have a right to exist unless a state of Palestine also exists. Number seven, I don't understand why so many of us seem to swallow the incomplete statement that Israel is the chosen people. Why no one seems to ask the logical question, chosen for what? There really is no such thing as just being chosen. One must clearly always be chosen for some purpose. I suspect, without saying it, the idea is that Israel is somehow special. Now, that is fine for Israelis to believe if it gives them some national unity. But why should any other group believe this? To do so clearly means you have accepted that you are lesser than they. And which society would accept this? Even in the most oppressed times and places like apartheid South Africa, the blacks never lost their sense of self worth, never felt they were less valuable than their oppressors, even when the entire system tried to tell them that they were less valuable. The people of Gaza, West Bank, and Lebanon have not given up their dignity in spite of the invasion and atrocities committed by Israel. So, why do so many people seem to accept this obvious humiliation so readily? Well, I've admitted my confusion. If you feel you can help me understand, I'd like to hear from you. Thank you. Please leave a comment.